Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I'll be making this card. It features a few digis from Polkadoodles and I'm calling it a reverse pull tab, and that's because I actually want the object on my card to move in the opposite direction from the direction that I'm pulling the tab. But when you see me construct this card, you'll realize it's just a double slider. So, but it works for this purpose because this image of the little boy was facing towards the left, and I didn't really think about it too much ahead of time when I printed this out and colored it. And so if I had thought about it in advance, I would have flipped the image so that he's actually facing towards the right, because I actually want my pull tab to move towards the right. But if you ever find yourself in that position, no worries, you can do what I've done here and create a double slider or a reverse pull tab. So I am leaving the coloring in. However, if you want to skip seeing this, I've timestamped this video so you can skip straight ahead to the card construction. It's, I think, about the 6-minute mark or so, but if you hover over the timeline, you'll see a bookmark for exactly where that starts, and you can always skip ahead. Now, this is sort of the first set of Copic markers that I've treated myself to, because I've really started to enjoy coloring characters in, and even though I have a set of skin tone alcohol markers that I've been really enjoying and getting fairly decent results with, they were a little bit blotchy. So I thought, well, with the face, blotchy is not good. So I thought that I would invest in just a handful of skin tone ranged markers. To the left there, you see my little cheat sheet so that I can test out blending these various combinations and also remember what colors I have or want to use for each sort of skin tone. So I tried to get enough markers so that I would have a good variety of light to medium to dark skin tones. And I know that I can always use some underlay colors if I want to maybe tint a skin tone to be a little bit more pinkish or a little bit more yellow or olive. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to really play with this set. And I'm really enjoying using the Copics. It's hard to not buy more because they are really, really nice to work with. I can see why everybody loves them so much. But for the rest of my coloring, I am going back to my ADHESIVES because I have a good range of colors there. And for everything else, my ADHESIVES are really great. And in fact, I would use them, for skin tones, but I actually do not have the skin tone range in ADHESIVES. They do have a set that specifically does have a collection for skin tones, but I thought, well, I've been enjoying coloring skin tones so much that let me just go ahead and dive right into getting the Copics. Generally with my coloring, what I like to do is start with my darkest color and then use a mid-tone color to blend that out and soften that edge, and then go over everything with my lightest marker. Now, sometimes with lighter markers, because there's more bleach in there, or not bleach, but more alcohol solution, which does bleach the color, if I find that it's gotten too light, then I may go in with a second pass just to deepen those shadows a little bit more. And I often do this with hair. I don't always do it with clothing, but most of the time I'll do 2 passes on the hair. And what I'm looking for when I select my colors is that they blend well into each other. The mid-tone color is what I'm looking at for sort of the color that I want my object to be, and the lighter color is more of a highlight, and the darker color is a shadow. So now we're going to get into constructing this card. It's going to be a 5x7 card, and I have this interactive die set from LDRS, and there are a number of different dies that let you create a multitude of interactive cards. And these 2 dies are just one way of creating basically a ribbon slider is another name for it, a double slider card, a pull tab card. what they allow you to do is just cut 2 little slots, and there's a lot of different ways of creating similar mechanisms. And if you caught my portrait changer card for Paper Sweeties, I hand cut, my own mechanism, and I didn't use any dies at all. So if you don't have any of these dies, I'll pop a link to that Paper Sweeties video in the upper right hand corner so you can see how to create this mechanism just by cutting this piece. It'll look a little bit different, but I just want to show different ways of creating this mechanism, because you may not have this specific die set, but you may have something similar in your stash that you can use to create this. And I've just got a little bag here. It's probably a bag from a die set, maybe, I don't know. You can use any sort of grocery bag or packaging bag that's plastic and a little bit on the sort of a softer plastic. You don't want the really hard, kind of crunchy, crisp. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but this is more of the bendy, soft kind of plastic. And it was attached in a loop that I just cut off, and it's longer than I need, which is great. And I've cut it to just shy of 1/2 inch because my slot is about 1/2 inch. And I'm just attaching some strong score tape on the end of one of those ends there, and I looped my plastic through both ends of the slot to create a conveyor belt of sorts. And when you go to attach this, you don't want it to be so tight that it's hard for that plastic to slide between those 2 slots, but you don't want it so loose that there's too much wiggle room or flex. So there's a little bit of a balance there, but you'll get the hang of it if you just test it out with your finger and you're able to just using your finger slide that plastic back and forth, then you've got it just right. And if it feels too hard to move, then you can always just cut it off and then attach a new piece of plastic. So here I'm just cutting down some digipaper from Polkadoodles as well. I'll leave links to everything in the description box below, but I thought that this soft pink peachy color would be really perfect as the background for my scene. And so I'll get that attached to my card base first. And for any sort of kinetic card or interactive card, I do like to go with my 120-pound cover weight cardstock as my card base, so that it's nice and sturdy, and whatever mechanism I apply to it, it's going to hold up to that, and it's not going to be bendy once you start moving all the pieces around. These 2 pieces here are about 1 inch tall, and they are just scraps left over from cutting down or creating my card base, which was just started off with a US letter size piece of cardstock, and I trimmed it to 10 inches by 7, and along the 10-inch side I scored at 5 to give me a 5x7 folded card. So the leftover pieces that I had, I'm cutting it, or I rounded the corners on one end, and I have 2 of them so that I can actually strengthen this pull tab. It's already 120-pound each of those layers, but by doubling that up, we get really, really strong pull tab, because I imagine, once somebody gets this, they'll want to play with the mechanism a little bit, maybe pass it on so that other people can see it, hopefully, and they'll want to play with it a few times. So you definitely want it to hold up. Now, I've got my ribbon mechanism, and I just trimmed off a little bit off of that right-hand side. And the reason for that is so that there's space behind my pull tab so that you can really grab onto that pull tab and not have too much obstructing it. And as with most of the interactive cards that I make, I do like to use some low-tack tape. Painter's tape generally is what I use to just preview, trial run my mechanism and make sure that it's moving the way that I want it to move. And so I've got a little bit of that black low-tack tape on my little boy there, and I even put some painter's tape on my pull tab so that I can test that motion and pulling him along that conveyor belt track. Here I've just got a piece of heavyweight acetate. It's the nice sturdy stuff. I have a lot left over from various Crafter's Companion kits, but I did buy a pack from Hunky Dory, and I do really like their heavyweight acetate. It's nice and thick and stands up strong, so great for pop-up cards and great for applications like these where I don't know for certain that my little boy die cut is tall enough to reach the conveyor belt that I have. So I've just created a little stand out of that acetate. That way I can attach the stand to my conveyor belt with some strong redline tape, and then I can attach my little boy wherever he needs to go. And a second ago there, I did a little bit of dry running so that I can see how far I want him to travel along this track to meet up with the girl, because I want him to bring flowers to her. Now, you could, if you wanted, you could put her on the front of this conveyor belt and then they would meet in the middle, but it's her birthday and I thought he should really be the one to go to her. She shouldn't have to meet him midway, so I have him crossing the length of the card, and I added some foam along the entire bottom stretch of my mechanism, and I put foam right up to where I want him to stop moving. So at this point, I'm off camera a little bit just to find some coordinating papers to use as the front of or bottom of my card, which will go in front of my mechanism to hide all of that. So I fuss around a little bit with figuring out how I want to place this, and that's definitely one thing that you should just take your time to do. It may take a while to figure out exactly how you want to position everything with all of your mechanisms in place, and trial run things with just some temporary low-tack tape, but it's well worth doing before anything gets permanently glued down. Because once it's glued down, especially if you like to use liquid adhesive, as I do, it can be hard to fix. Most of the time, there's ways to fix little boo-boos, but I find that it's well worth it to test everything in advance. And later, there is one aspect that I did have to fix a little bit, and you'll see that because I did leave it in the video, but when we get there I'll also tell you what not to do, but I'll also show you how I fixed it. So what I'll ultimately end up doing is embossing that bottom panel, and I'm gonna go ahead and attach my pull tab at this time because I'm fairly certain where that's going to be placed, and so that's not something that I think will change once I get the rest of the card figured out. So I do bounce around a little bit, but basically I'm sticking down the parts of the card that I feel most certain about. And so here I'm gonna pull my conveyor belt so that it's all the way to the left, and this is where I'm going to attach my pull tab. So you can see just barely, there you go, you can see the acetate stand is all the way to the right, and then I put the adhesive once that belt was all the way to the other extreme end. And I'm testing to make sure that everything moves really nice and smoothly. If there's any tackiness, you can take your anti-static powder bag and just brush some on so that you remove all of that tackiness. And you can even brush a little bit of anti-static powder into the slot as well to get that to have a little bit less friction. Now for the front of the mechanism, I do want to add some foam strips so that my pull tab has a track to slide within, because otherwise it can kind of wiggle up and down a little bit, and it'll be smoother if this pull tab is pulled, straight as possible. And rather than rely on the card recipient to know that, you can add a couple of strips of foam adhesive to the front of the mechanism, and that just creates this little channel that the pull tab is confined to. And here I'm just using a leftover section of foam sheet that I have, and this is how I prefer to buy my foam. I buy them in these I don't think it's quite an 8.5 by 11, but it's something thereabouts. And there's already adhesive on one side, and then I can just cut it down or die cut from it, as you saw in that other section, that as I need, because it's a nice large sheet. And whatever width of foam strip I need, I just use the corresponding width of double-sided adhesive tape on the side of the foam sheet that doesn't already have adhesive. So here I'm going to put a couple of strips at the top and at the bottom. And my mistake was that you'll see I actually put at the bottom, I actually put adhesive the full length of the bottom. And this top piece here, I was able to fit this piece of foam, which was about 1/4 of an inch. However, it would have been really, really snug. And I want there to be just a little bit of wiggle room, just so that there's not friction of the pull tab actually rubbing up against the foam strips. But I don't want a lot of wiggle room to where it's not gliding straight or parallel, but I don't want it too tight to where it actually adds friction and makes it harder to slide or pull on that tab. And so at the top there, I started off with a section of adhesive foam, but at the bottom, I'm actually going to, before I attach this decorative layer, which I'm just going to cut down here, I did actually add some additional foam, and you'll see that in a second here. So I'm just making sure that everything lines up where I want. And the other thing I almost forgot to do was actually stamp out a little kind of indicator that this is interactive. And so I've just got a little stamp that says pull here. You may have a little arrow that you could use, and it's just a little hint, a little clue to the card recipient that, hey, there's something to do here. Pull this and see what happens. And so I'm just using I think this is a Nuvo hybrid ink cube to stamp that out. And I've got just enough space there to get that to show. And so now I'm gonna, again, dry fit everything, make sure that everything is cut down to the size that I want. And here you'll see I'm gonna add a couple more strips of foam. So you can put foam anywhere that isn't along or going to obstruct the movement of the plastic, the conveyor belt. So I add that additional strip at the bottom, which pretty well covers the entire length of the bottom. I added a little bit at the top and then a little bit to the left of my slot. And this is where my mistake is. I should not have left that gap at the top because there is a little bit of wiggle room, not a lot, but a little bit. And so it is possible, and you saw it in my preview, that gap can create a catch point where your pull tab mechanism can get stuck on. And so ultimately, I realized that once this mechanism is, I actually realized it at this point before the mechanism was glued down to my card, which is one reason to create this and then really test out that sliding mechanism, because once it's on your card, it gets a lot harder to fix things like this. And so what I'm going to do is just cut another thin width of foam, and then I'm going to just squeeze this in and fill up that gap. And I did use liquid adhesive, which you do have to be a little bit careful with. Don't use so much so that it oozes out and goes where it shouldn't, where it may actually kind of glue down something that's supposed to stay free so that it can move. But I'm just kind of, manipulating it, that little section of foam enough so that I can squeeze it in there and smooth out that track so that we don't have a catch point for our pull tab so that it can glide smoothly. So now that that's done, I'm gonna now attach this to my card front. And again, every step of the way, I do like to test my mechanism to make sure it's still moving. And you can see I left the balloon not colored in, and I almost forgot about it and started to put foam down. And then I realized I should really color this before I put any more foam on this so that it's nice and flat. And the reason why I didn't color it in was because I wasn't exactly sure what color the little boy's shirt was going to be. I wasn't sure on the pattern papers I was going to use. And for things like other objects in the scene like that, I do like to try to keep the color palette of my entire card a little bit more minimal. And so I left that balloon uncolored until I had the rest of my cards sorted out so that I could maybe pick up a color that's used somewhere else and use that on the balloon, so that now we've got the orange in the little boy's shirt, and he starts off on one end of the card and she's on the other. So if your eye is sort of attracted to that orange color, then hopefully having the two spots of orange kind of naturally moves your eye across the width of the card. And I do that later with that dark blue as well, the blue in his jeans. I use that for my happy birthday sentiment and the little Nouveau Drop embellishments that I add. So here I'm kind of doing my final dry fit of positioning these two characters. I want them to fit on the card, line up so that scale-wise, they look like they are standing in line with each other. And that's what I've paused this here so that you can see I'm trying to get their heads to sort of be right eye level with each other, essentially. And speaking of the eyes, what I did off camera, I believe, I don't have footage of me doing this, but I did color in the eyes with some of my black glaze pen. Gives a really nice black shine to the eyes. And then once that was dry, I just added a little dot of a white gel pen so that it just brings a little bit more life to the eyes. The illustration does leave that little white spot, but when I was coloring in the skin, I colored right over it with my skin tone. So that's why you don't see that little white highlight in the eye at the moment. And that's why I did add the black glaze pen for that little shine, and that little bit of a white gel pen for that specular highlight in the eye. And now that my little boy is sort of locked in position, I'm pulling him all the way the furthest that he can go, and I'm lining up my little girl. She needs a couple of layers of foam because our mechanism has a couple of layers of foam. So there's one layer of foam between the mechanism and the card base, and then there's another layer of foam on top of the mechanism below the darker pink panel. So in order for her to sit, you know, outside of that pink panel, she does need both layers of foam so that she can be level. And then here I've just got a happy birthday die. I need to look up what set this is from. I think it's from a Spellbinder set, but I'm die cutting it twice, once out of heavyweight white cardstock and once out of a dark blue color, solid color cardstock. And this was such a sort of fine detail die that I did have to die cut it with my larger Gemini machine just to make sure it was fully cut through. The mini didn't quite make it all the way through this 120-pound cardstock, and I think that's because my my little folder is a little bit warped at this point. When I go to attach these two layers, I did use my white layer as just a small thin highlight. So it's offset by a little bit where the white is off to the left and a little bit higher than the blue. That just makes it a little bit easier to spot it off of the page. And here's that accent of the Nuvo Drops, which is a new color that I just picked up. This is actually called Night Sky. It's a glitter drop. And I didn't realize that this would be bluish in tone, but it's a really nice, dark, almost denim blue. So I thought it would go nicely with the blue as a nice dark accent color, because everything else is so light with the pink. So it really pops, and it helps you to move your eye across the page. So you're going from the upper left all the way to the bottom, and then all the way to the right in the jeans that the little boy is wearing. So that's my card for today. I hope that you like it, and if you did, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. And if you want to catch new videos as I publish them, consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the notification bell. Thank you so much, and until my next video, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye!